Okay, so, Vancouver's housing market has been, cooling off a bit lately, right? Prices have dipped a bit for most of the past, 9 months or so.
Yeah, that's right. There's been a gradual kind of softening that we've been watching.
But now there's this whole other thing we got to factor in, and that's the U.S. tariffs that just got put into place. I mean, that's a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, absolutely. These tariffs are a real game changer. I mean, they're adding a whole new layer of uncertainty to the mix.
Yeah.
And that could really shake things up in the market.
For sure. So that's kind of the big question we're diving into today.
Hi.
Like with prices already dropping, and we've been in this per capita recession for over 2 years now, and now these tariffs are on the table. So what does all this mean for Vancouver home prices going forward?
Yeah.
What can we expect?
Right. And it's not just about looking at these things in isolation. Each of these factors plays a role, but it's how they all interact with each other that's really important. That's what we need to understand.
Okay, so let's start with just the talk about tariffs, right? Even before they were actually put in place, just the possibility of them, seemed to have spooked some buyers.
Yeah.
It seems like about a month and a half ago, right around when the U.S. started seriously talking about tariffs, things kind of shifted.
Yeah, you can really see how psychology plays a role in the market, right? Just the threat of something like that can have a real impact even before anything actually happens.
Totally. And to see that in action, I mean, look at Toronto. They're often seen as a bellwether for the rest of Canada, right? Especially when it comes to trade and all that.
Yeah.
So back in January, sales were actually up, a decent amount, like 12% month over month. But then February hits, tariff talks are heating up, and bam, sales tanked. Like a 28% drop from January.
Wow, that's huge. And you got to remember, February is usually a stronger month than January. That's when the spring market starts to pick up.
Exactly. So drop that big in that time frame, I mean, that really says something.
Oh, yeah. It definitely highlights just how much uncertainty can spook buyers.
Yeah.
When things feel shaky, people tend to hold back.
Now, Toronto did see a little price bump in February, like a tiny 0.4% increase month over month. But most people think that's just a blip. The overall trend is still downwards.
Yeah, that makes sense. Prices don't always move in lockstep with sales, Sometimes there's a bit of a lag. So that small increase doesn't necessarily mean things are turning around, especially when you see such a big drop in sales volume.
And to give you an idea of just how big that sales drop in Toronto was, I mean, look back over the past 25 years, there have only been 2 other times when February sales were that bad. April 2020 during the peak of the whole COVID shutdown, and then December 2008, the heart of the financial crisis.
Whoa. Okay, so to see numbers like that again now, that's definitely concerning. It really shows you the magnitude of the impact those tariff talks had, even just the talk.
Right, so we've got that immediate reaction to tariffs, but we also got to consider the bigger picture, right? What's going on in the Canadian economy as a whole? And on the surface, things might seem okay. GDP growth was reported at 2.6% annualized for the fourth quarter. That's actually better than what the Bank of Canada was predicting.
Yeah, at first glance, that GDP number seems pretty positive, right?
Right. But when you dig a little deeper, things aren't quite as rosy, especially when you start looking at the per capita GDP numbers.
Yeah, that's where things get interesting. It gives you a better sense of what's actually happening to individual Canadians.
Yeah.
On average.
So in 2024, per capita GDP actually shrank by 1.4%. And in 2023, it fell by 1.3%. So what that means is that for over 2 years now, something like 25, 27 months, Canada's been in a per capita recession. Basically, the economy might be growing overall, but when you divide it by the number of people, the average person is actually worse off.
That's a really important distinction to make, right? The total size of the pie might be getting bigger, but the slices that each person gets are actually shrinking.
And I think that's what a lot of people are feeling, right? Like that reported GDP growth just doesn't match up with their own experience. Their own finances aren't getting better,
It makes you wonder where that growth is actually happening, right? And who's actually benefiting from it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we've got this big drop in job vacancies. It's at an 8-year low, the lowest it's been since 2017. So even though GDP is supposedly growing, the job market seems to be struggling.
Yeah, that's definitely a bit of a red flag. A healthy economy usually means lots of jobs being created, right? But this suggests there might be some underlying weakness in the labor market.
It makes you think maybe that GDP growth is being inflated a bit by, just overall inflation. And maybe we need to be paying more attention to the government deficit too, as part of the whole economic picture.
Right. Nominal GDP growth can definitely be misleading if prices are rising quickly. Doesn't necessarily mean that actual production or output is increasing.
Okay, so now those tariffs we talked about, they're actually in place. As of Wednesday, March 5th, and there's a real chance Canada might hit back with counter tariffs, tit for tat. So with all that going on, a lot of people think the Bank of Canada might have to lower interest rates even more than they were planning.
Yeah, if these tariffs end up hurting trade and slowing down the economy, the Bank of Canada might feel like they need to step in and try to stimulate things a bit, by making it cheaper to borrow money.
And it makes sense when you think about that per capita recession we talked about. Even if the overall GDP numbers are kind of fuzzy, the tariffs could still end up shrinking the economy overall.
Yeah, those per capita numbers suggest that the economy is already a bit vulnerable. It wouldn't take much to tip it into a full-blown recession.
And with an election coming up, the government's not going to want to see the economy tank.
Yeah.
So that could definitely put pressure on them to do something.
Oh, yeah, for sure. An election year always adds another layer of complexity to these things.
And this feels really different from the COVID situation, right? Back then, there was a lot of government spending and pent-up demand, so the recovery was pretty quick. But this time, it feels like we need more than just a quick fix. We might need some bigger structural changes to really get things back on track.
I think you're right. This is a different kind of challenge. Tariffs are more of a long-term thing. They affect supply chains and prices in a way that's harder to just bounce back from.
And one of the big things people are worried about is higher prices, right? Because these tariffs basically act like a tax on imported goods. So everything from, clothes to electronics could get more expensive.
And that can really hurt people's wallets, especially if wages aren't keeping up. It's like a double whammy.
Yeah.
The economy slows down and everything costs more.
So in the long run, we could be looking at prices going up, service quality going down, unemployment going up. That's not a good combination. It's what they call stagflation, right?
Ugh, stagflation is a nightmare. It's like being stuck in quicksand. No matter what you do, it just keeps dragging you down.
And even here in BC, the provincial government just raised the speculation tax, the one that targets foreign and domestic homeowners. So it makes you wonder if that's really the right move right now, when the economy is already kind of shaky.
Yeah, it's a tough call. Governments are in a bind right now. They need revenue, but they also don't want to do anything that could make things worse. So it's a delicate balancing act.
It feels like maybe some governments are tempted to use this whole situation as an excuse to, raise more taxes or implement policies that might not actually be helpful in the long run. Like maybe they'll think about lifting the foreign buyers ban or getting rid of the GST on new homes. But is that really the answer?
It's hard to say. Those are definitely tools that governments have at their disposal. But whether they're the right tools for this particular job is debatable.
It's like Canada's this big company that's, not doing so well. And they need to make money fast. But instead of, innovating or cutting costs, they're just looking for ways to squeeze more out of their existing customers.
I like that analogy. It really captures the dilemma we're facing right now. It's not enough to just try to make a quick buck. We need to think about long-term solutions that will actually make the economy stronger and more resilient.
Okay, so let's get down to brass tacks here. What's happening in the Vancouver real estate market specifically? We already talked about prices trending down. So what does the data say?
Well, the February numbers give us a pretty good snapshot of how the market is reacting to all this, the tariffs, the economic uncertainty, all of it.
Right. So first off, sales, 1,850 homes sold in Greater Vancouver last month. That's a 12% drop from February last year, and it's a whopping 29% below the 10-year average for February. So yeah, things are definitely slowing down.
Those are pretty big drops, both compared to last year and compared to the long-term trend. It definitely shows that demand is weakening.
But here's the thing. For 4 months before February, October through January, sales were actually up year over year. There was this momentum building, and then boom, February hits, and it all comes to a screeching halt. So that tells me that those tariff talks, that's what really spooked people.
Wow, yeah, that sudden shift is pretty telling. It really looks like the tariffs threw a wrench into the whole spring market.
Like someone slammed on the brakes right before things were supposed to get going.
When there's that much uncertainty on the horizon, it makes sense that people would hesitate before making a big purchase, like a house.
Okay, so what about the supply side? How are new listings looking?
Well, in February, there were 5,066 new listings in Greater Vancouver. That's actually up 11% from last year and 12% above the 10-year average for February. So on the surface, it seems like there are more options for buyers, right?
Yeah, more options usually means lower prices, right?
Right, in theory. But we got to dig a little deeper to see what's really going on with these listings.
So tell me more. What's unusual about these numbers?
Well, for one thing, February listings were actually lower than January listings, and we haven't seen that in 6 years. Also, condo listings hit a record high in February, and that comes after another record high in January. So something's definitely up with condos.
So why are so many people trying to sell their condos all of a sudden?
Well, it could be a few things. Some investors might be reacting to those policy changes we talked about, the stricter Airbnb rules and the higher speculation tax. Also, condos in Vancouver take a long time to build, right? So by the time some of these projects are finished, the market might have changed and buyers might not be as interested anymore. Plus, interest rates are going up, so some investors might be worried about having to renew their mortgages at a higher rate.
Makes sense. It seems like buyers are also leaning more towards those, missing middle homes these days, like single-family houses, duplexes, townhouses. They just offer more space, and they're often quicker to build.
Yeah, those types of properties are definitely in high demand right now. They tend to be more practical for families, and they're not as affected by those long development timelines.
And don't forget all the purpose-built rentals that are being built. That's got to be having an impact on the condo market too, right? Because now there's more competition for renters.
Yeah, definitely. As the rental market gets more competitive, it makes condos less appealing as investment properties. If you can't find tenants easily or if you have to lower your rent, it's not as profitable.
So overall, inventory is up 32% compared to last year. There are currently 12,350 active listings in Greater Vancouver. That's 36% higher than the 10-year average for February.
So yeah, there are a lot of homes for sale right now. That definitely gives buyers more bargaining power.
But it's not as simple as just looking at the number of listings, right? Because not all listings are created equal. Some properties might be overpriced or in bad condition or just not what buyers are looking for.
Exactly. Just because there are a lot of options doesn't mean they're all good options.
So even though inventory is high, it's still below the record we saw back in February 2012. That was 14,870 active listings. So we're not quite at that level yet.
Interesting. So we've been here before. The market has been even slower than this in the past.
Okay, let's talk about the sales to active ratio. That gives us a good idea of, whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market.
Right. A low ratio means buyers have the upper hand. A high ratio means sellers have the upper hand.
So overall, the ratio for Greater Vancouver is 15%, which puts it firmly in buyer's market territory. It's up a little bit from last month, though.
So it's still a buyer's market, but it's not quite as extreme as it was.
And if you break it down by property type, detached homes have a ratio of only 10%. That's a strong buyer's market. Townhomes are at 20%, which is just barely a seller's market. And condos are at 17%, which is more or less balanced.
So it really varies depending on what type of property you're looking at, but detached homes are definitely the most buyer-friendly right now.
One thing that's kind of surprising is that foreclosures are still pretty low in Vancouver. There were actually 11 fewer foreclosures this month than last month. The total is only 245, which is a tiny fraction of all listings, like 0.17%.
That's interesting. It suggests that most homeowners in Vancouver are still able to manage their finances. Even with the market slowing down, they're not being forced to sell their homes.
And unlike Toronto, we're not seeing a big spike in foreclosures here.
Yeah, it seems like Vancouver homeowners are more resilient. Maybe it's because the job market here is a bit stronger. Or maybe it's because people are more cautious about taking on too much debt.
Here's another thing that's a bit weird. The average days on market actually dropped significantly this month. It went from 32 days down to 16 days. That's the lowest it's been since June of last year.
Wait, really? That seems counterintuitive. With sales slowing down, you'd expect homes to stay on the market longer.
Yeah, it is a bit strange. But it could mean that the homes that are selling really quickly. The ones that are priced well and in good condition, those are getting snapped up, while the other ones are just sitting there.
That makes sense. So there's still demand for certain types of properties.
Okay, lastly, let's talk prices. The Home Price Index, or HPI, for Greater Vancouver dropped by $4,000 this month. It's now at $1,169,000 year over year. It's only down 1%, but it's been trending downwards for 8 of the past 9 months since June of last year.
So even though the yearly drop is small, the recent trend is definitely downwards.
Yeah, the HPI has fallen 3.5% from its peak a few months ago, but it's still way higher than it was before the pandemic, like 26% higher.
So even though prices are falling, they're still really high historically.
The median sale price actually went up a little bit this month by $2,000. It's now at $920,000. And the average sale price jumped by $16,000 to $1,228,000.
So those numbers are going in the opposite direction of the HPI. Why is that?
Well, it could be because the mix of homes that are selling is changing.
Yeah.
Maybe more expensive homes are selling this month compared to last month, so that would skew the average upward.
That makes sense. The average and median can be influenced by outliers. If a few really expensive homes sell, it can make the overall numbers look higher.
So even though those other price indicators went up, I think it's safe to say that the HPI is a better reflection of the overall trend. And that trend is downwards.
Yeah, I agree. given all the other data we've looked at, it's hard to imagine prices suddenly reversing course.
So looking ahead to the spring market, I think the big thing to watch is what the Bank of Canada does with interest rates. They've already hinted that they might lower rates again to try to offset the impact of the tariffs.
Yeah, their next move is going to be really important. Lower interest rates would definitely make it easier for people to buy homes, but it's not clear if they'll go far enough to really make a difference.
It's possible that lower rates could create some good buying opportunities, especially for people who are renewing their mortgages.
Yeah.
Even if rates don't go back down to those crazy low levels we saw during COVID, they could still be pretty attractive.
Yeah, anyone who's thinking about buying a home or refinancing should definitely be paying attention to what the Bank of Canada does.
But even though the overall market might be heading in a certain direction, there are always going to be individual opportunities out there. It really depends on the specific neighborhood, the specific property. Those micro trends can be different from the macro trends.
Exactly. Real estate is all about location, 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 and timing too. Sometimes the best deals are found in unexpected places.
Okay, so to sum it all up, Vancouver's housing market was already cooling down. And now these tariffs have thrown a big wrench into things. They've spooked buyers, dampened sales, and they're likely to keep pushing prices down. So the next few months are going to be really interesting. We need to keep an eye on what the Bank of Canada does and see how the market reacts to all this uncertainty.
It's definitely a complex situation with a lot of moving parts, but by understanding the key factors at play, we can make more informed decisions about our own investments and our own housing strategies.
And one last thought for you. As you're watching the market unfold, try to look beyond just the basic sales and price data. What other indicators might give you an early warning sign of what's coming next? What are some of the things that most people overlook?
That's a great question. It really challenges you to think outside the box, to look for those subtle clues that might be hidden in plain sight. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from the things that others miss.
Exactly. So keep your eyes open and your ears to the ground. You never know where you'll find that next piece of the puzzle.
Happy hunting.
Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.